You're wearing a sweater that was selected for you by the people in this room from a pile of stuff.
Give me a full ballerina skirt and a hint of saloon, and I'm on board.
I have a hole in my stomach!
I can't go back.
Welcome to the She Became Visible podcast. I'm your host, Rene Steelman. This podcast is my story. It's your story. It's our story. It's all the stories of all the women who one day knew that it was time to remember who they were, who they are, and stand up and be seen. Hello. Welcome to She Became Visible. I am Rene Steelman, your host, and I have got a story for you today. The timing could not be more perfect to make everyone aware of the cuts that are being made that are affecting people's lives. If you aren't involved in any of the programs that were previously available to families who have children or adults who are caregivers, and the members of their family have disabilities, and those benefits are being cut, you can't understand the gravity of what's happening. And my guest today, I'm going to have a hard time getting through this because her story is absolutely heartbreaking. It's another homage to the fabulous women that I have met throughout my life who are also caregivers, who have also devoted their entire lives to caring for their families, who did not sign up for this, who did not envision that this would be their lives when they were excited about having children and caring for their children. But it is their lives. And with bravery and fortitude, they are pushing forward and doing what needs to be done. And these are the people, the women that I love to highlight on She Became Visible. Her name is Kim, and I'm going to bring her on so that she can share her story and tell you of the things that are going on in her life right now and why these things are happening. So let's bring Kim on. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing very well. And I want you to know that Kim reached out to me, which I love. Another thing that I love about social media, and you can say what you want. And I know that social media has its downsides. It opens up your world and it invites people to get together and to get to know each other that would have never had an opportunity to get to know each other. And that is what happened when Kim reached out. So I want to read to you what Kim told me when she reached out to me. She shared with me that the VA, the Veterans Association, has been providing my son with 168 hours a week for years of round-the-clock care to assist her in her caregiving. 168 hours a week. Now, I don't have my calculator. 24 times 7. So this is how many hours that she was receiving to assist her in the care of her 6'3" son who weighs around 200 pounds. This woman is this man's caregiver. 6'3" man, 200 pounds. She is his 24/7 caregiver. And they were providing assistance for that so that she might possibly, I don't know, take a shower, go for a walk, run to the grocery store, something that we all, take for granted. And then without notice in mid-January, they cut his hours to 15. 15. That's less than 3 hours a day. That's nothing. We're going to spend 3 hours on this podcast. That's less than 3 hours a day. That is showering, bathing. I don't know if we'll talk about any kind of medical intervention that he needs, medications or anything like that. That's nothing. Any of you that are mothers that have taken care of children, you know that 3 hours a day is nothing. And when she first saw this, Kim, tell us what your reaction was.
I thought it was a typo.
Yeah. And you got it through a letter, or how did you receive this information?
The Veterans Administration pays private agencies to send caregivers. So the private agency that we had chosen called and said, oh, something happened. We only got 16 out of the 168 hours after his biannual. He had to see his physician twice a year in order to re-up the contracts. And I thought, well, that's a mistake. So I called. And of course, with the Veterans Administration, there's several organizations in one. So it's like an octopus with many arms.
Right.
You have to know who you're talking to. And I've had to learn how to navigate the VA. It's like a labyrinth. So I had to call the correct department to find out what had happened to the hours. And they basically said that there had been cuts across the board and that the veterans that had been receiving a lot of extra hours during the week were all reduced to 15, 16 hours a week. And I said, you realize my son has to have care 24 hours a day. He can't do anything for himself. And they said, well, you need to make an appeal. So I made an appeal immediately, same day, and I was denied.
And do they give you any reason?
The reason is that they use an algorithm or a set of information, and he was James's condition never changes. So there were no changes in what was input. I was reassured by the doctor that there were no changes. We were there. We saw her putting in the information and communicating with the department that decides or says they decide how many hours are given. And in fact, there were no changes. So that algorithm did not change. They blamed it on that. They also, when they denied us, said, hey, you know what? Why don't you try getting involved with the caregiver program? Well, I've been in that caregiver program for years. That doesn't provide us any extra hours because that's a whole separate department. They provide respite hours for me, which are, I think, 30 days a year. Yeah. And then there's another program, which my son has been in since his accident 15 years ago, and that is called Aid and Attendance. He does receive money every month. A portion of his income or his special pension is aid and attendance. The problem is they never defined what portion of that it is, and nor does he have enough money to care for caregivers to come around. They're usually about $20 an hour or more.
Yeah.
He doesn't make that much money.
Right. I had that with my son. I had this respite program, but there's always a caveat. There's always something that will kick you out of the system. I mean, you have to have the perfect scenario. And I've really found that a lot of the caregiving programs, or even programs that are set up for the disabled, are really set up for people who have mental problems, or a lot of Down syndrome kids qualify because they're able to do a lot of physical stuff for themselves. And in my son's case, he had a feeding tube, and that's considered a medical condition that required nurses. Or so the respite care never worked because you would have to have a nurse that would feed him, and he had to eat every 2 hours. So even though they offered the respite care, he didn't qualify because I would have had to have had a trained nurse come in and feed him every 2 hours, and that's not possible. So there's always something that seems to kick you out. Okay, so this was in mid-January. It's now April. How long did it take for you to appeal? And did you have to do that through a letter, or could you just call someone? Or
it was a process. It was a letter, and I had some assistance with some people at the VA. It was supposed to take a maximum of 45 days to get an answer. They did create an answer in mid-February. However, they never sent me the letter. So I waited until the beginning of March, and I finally just kept calling, to see what the status was. And I got a hold of a separate woman in a separate department at a separate VA. And she said, oh, the letter's right here in the file. And I said, I never received it. And she said, well, let me read it to you. And she's the one that read me the denial.
Okay.
And then she actually took it upon herself to send me the letter, which was extremely unprofessional of the VA to do that to me.
Yeah. So, and I know you're working with an expert at the VA. What is he doing for you? And tell us about how he's trying to advocate for you.
He's actually a 2-star general, and he has been trying to advocate and help create changes in the VA since 1977.
Oh, well,
and he
not just yesterday.
No, he's the one that encouraged me. He said, your story is exactly what we need, because we need a point of pain. You and James's story really represents what we've been trying to get the VA to change and take a personal look at these veterans instead of just making across the board cuts. Without realizing that, for instance, in the caregiver program, I had a handbook that they gave me when I entered into the caregiver program, and it just defines what you need to do. One, you need to live with your veteran. It can only be one person in the program. They give you a stipend that, in my circumstance, adds up to about 23 cents an hour. It's a stipend, and they also give you health care, which most doctors don't take. So my insurance is great, other than I can't find a doctor that'll take it most of the time. Then there's, the fact that they expect you to assist the veteran and be his primary caregiver. However, my son doesn't need assistance. He's like an infant. He needs to have every single thing done for him.
Yeah.
I'm not helping him put his shirt on or helping him eat or helping him make a shopping list. And yet there are people in my position as caregivers living with veterans who do very little to help that veteran because the veteran doesn't really need a lot.
Right.
They have to have circumstances that require a caregiver, but there are extremes in how much care needs to be given. I'm not
Right.
assisting my son. I'm virtually living his life for him.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to live my life too.
It's so startling, Kim. And I have to tell you, I have another friend that is in the process because they're starting to cut school benefits. And she has a son that had meningitis and it went to his brain. It's affected everything. And those of us, and, I want you to tell your story too of his, growth and, and when his injury and how it all happened. But the one thing that I used to feel very, grateful for was the fact that my son had cerebral palsy. He was in a wheelchair. It's not progressive. It also doesn't get better. It just is. There's brain injury, and brain injury is injury forever. When I was taking care of him and when his social worker would come over to the house every quarter, I think she came over, we just kind of laughed because she had paperwork that she had to do. Nothing was going to change in him. And there was never a question, but she still had to come over and verify that he somehow had not gotten better than the last 6 months. His disability was the same, but we knew the way the program worked and it never really changed. And I was very grateful that he didn't have a disability that they thought, well, maybe he's getting better. Maybe he's learning how to talk. Maybe he's learning how to walk. Maybe he can now feed himself. No, nothing is going to change because this is a brain injury. And so I was grateful that his care stayed always the same. But like you, I was considered a parent provider. And so he lived with me and we had to do everything. So I want you to start from the beginning, talk about James's childhood, when he went into the military and his service in Iraq.
Okay, so James was an amazing kid. He was one of those kids that parents call and say, your son can come over anytime. If he did anything, he immediately would confess. I don't think he actually got in any real disciplinary issues until he was 14. And even then it was kind of laughable. The things he did were so basic. And he was just an excellent child, a really good kid. Everybody loved him. He was the hero to his brother and his sisters. They all adored him. During the era where we started to send troops to Iraq after 9/11, he got real concerned that they might draft. So he decided, with the encouragement of my father, who was a retired lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps, that he would join the Marine Corps in order to prevent his brother from being drafted, which I thought was noble, but I still didn't want him to join the Marine Corps, but he did. And he served his first 4 years honorably. And instead of getting out of the military after having come home from Iraq, he got married and he was expecting his first child. And he decided, since there was a recession going on in 2008, that he would just stay in the military for the time being. So he re-enlisted. And at that time, he thought he would just go ahead and try to get into the recon program, which is very similar to Navy SEALs or the Green Beret in the various militaries. For the Marine Corps, it's the recon division. So he entered that program, and it was very rigorous training, one of which of the trainings is that you get in a 16-foot deep pool in Camp Pendleton, California. And in full gear, you dive down and pick up what's called a water brick and then bring it to the surface. And each of the young men in the circle, while they're doing what's called egg beater, if you know anything about swimming or water polo, keeping their head above water, they had to take turns. Well, somehow in the mix, James either was not spotted correctly. It's my understanding that there was a spotter that was missing at the time, or they had to turn their attention to another Marine that was potentially drowning, and James was under the water. According to his doctors at the emergency hospital, he was under the water approximately 5 minutes, where he was pulled from the water without vital signs. I interviewed the civilian lifeguard. I interviewed the young men that were in the pool beside him, and I had an opportunity to talk to one of the men who was at the side of the pool, who was a spotter. 3 different stories. 3 entirely different stories. So I will never know what really happened to my son. He was in a coma for 3 months. It was very unsure if he would survive. He did experience pneumonia. As a lot of people know, when these things happen, they're very prone to pneumonia. He was on life support. And then he started to come out of the coma right as his daughter was born. Coming out of coma is a long process. It can take up to 3 years. So he had to learn to speak again. It was evident right away that he was blind. He had no motor skills, no ability to stand, sit, move, roll over in bed. I mean, he couldn't even blow his own nose. He can only scratch his head now, but he had to relearn to hold his head up. It was a very long process. He was in rehabilitation centers for approximately 2 or 3 years. By the time his wife, decided it wasn't any fun to be married to a broken guy and had an affair, he ended up living with his father and his father's third wife for a while in Arizona in order for him to stay close to his daughter, who was in Southern California. I was in Texas. So although I wanted my son with me, I felt like it was important for him to maintain that relationship with his daughter, which went on for a few years. And then my ex-husband, my children's father, he had a massive stroke and some other major health issues, eventually leading to him passing away about 3 years ago. And that's when I brought James here to Texas. He's been with me ever since. He hasn't made a lot of improvement in the last 7 years. He has the ability to have a conversation. However, he suffers from some dementia. So even though you're having a great conversation with him, within a matter of minutes or an hour, he's going to say something that's absolutely not true. It's like living with someone with Alzheimer's. There's anger, there's delusion, there's upsets, there's thinking that he's still a decision maker and yet he's incapable of making real serious decisions. It's a daily struggle to just keep him focused and keep him happy. And my whole approach with him was to make sure that he maintained his dignity as a man, as a Marine. He has a daughter. She's 15 years old. I wanted him to have a home of his own so that when she visits, she had a bedroom to stay in and a place to stay and feel like he wasn't just living in a rehab or a nursing home or somewhere where she would not have a place to really call home alongside her father. So I've done all of that, and it's taken me years and years, an enormous amount of tons and tons of hours of work on the phone and interfacing with nonprofits and interfacing with the VA and just learning to navigate all these systems in order to provide my son with the happiest life, the opportunities for him to have fun. We have a boat. We take him out on a boat. He likes to go to restaurants. I had to facilitate his visits with his daughter, interface with his ex-wife. All the things that he would have done for himself, I do for him.
Something as simple as I looked at this picture. I know, but I want you to tell everybody what it took to get him in that boat. We've taken our son, we took him everywhere that we took the family, we took him. And to get him on a ride at Disneyland, even though he was on a wheelchair, or to get him in a boat or in a canoe when we would try to include him in things. Tell everybody what it took to get him in that boat.
Okay, so first of all, we have to have a specific vehicle to get him into.
Let's talk about vehicles that have been adapted and how that works. The $30,000 minivan becomes a $75,000 luxury vehicle somehow. Let's talk about that.
The vehicle that we had for him was a very large, oversized van. And then James had to purchase that because they offer these injured veterans one-time shot to get a vehicle. Those don't last, as you know. Vehicles grow old and have to be discarded.
Yeah.
So by the time I got James, he needed to buy a van, and he did out of his own money. And then the military or the VA provided him with a service to adapt it. It wasn't adapted very well. It was nothing but a problem all the time. He was very uncomfortable in it. So we decided to just use one of our own vehicles. So it takes a lot of strength to stand him, make sure he has no balance, so he's very tipsy. Usually I have my youngest son do this because he's a man. By the way, I'm 5'3.5", 62 years old, 130 pounds. My son has to do this. We have to kind of spot him to make sure James doesn't fall or nobody gets hurt, nobody gets injured. And we have to push him into the front seat, turn his body. This all takes strength and coordination. Right. Put him in the front seat. We have to put his wheelchair in the back, which means you have to have a vehicle that will hold a wheelchair. And then we take him to the boat, and then we take him out of the car, and we have to find a handicap spot. And don't get me started on that.
Don't get me started on that. I got you there, girl.
Actually unhandicapped. I've already taken them all up. So then we have to wheel him across a parking lot or, in some way get him down to the boat dock. We have to go through the gate, and now we have to make sure that our pontoon is up right against the dock, which I had to pay extra money at that dock to have an extra dock built so that there wasn't a gap between the boat and the dock. And then we have to make sure that the boat is held really tightly. That takes about 2 people. And then someone has to wheel him. And I had to buy a special boat for this. so that it was, the space was wide enough for a wheelchair. And then we roll him onto the boat quickly. Then it takes another act of God to get him up out of his wheelchair, turn him around, and then we sit him in the boat. In that picture that you see, we sit him in the corner where the seats come together. And this is a pontoon, a tri-tune. So he takes up the entire seat. That's our little therapy dog, Louis Vuitton. And then he sits there. He came from Slovakia, by the way.
Ooh.
And then James will sit there and he enjoys the wind and the spray and the conversation and the music. And sometimes we link up on the lake with other boats, and he enjoys the company of the people coming and going. And we keep him cool in the shade, or we put water on him regularly, help him eat and drink. And if he has to use a urinal, we have to then stand him up and wrap a blanket around him, and someone has to stand there and hold him up while someone holds the urinal. And it's always a lot of work and a lot of strength, a lot of process. But we do everything we can because he has wonderful siblings. I'm so grateful to have. Yes.
Yeah, your youngest son and your daughter, and they both live in Texas as well.
They do now. I have to bring all my family here. It took a long time to get them all, and they have careers of their own and families of their own. I actually have another daughter too, but she couldn't be there. She's quite busy with several little children.
Yeah. And you have grandchildren. And I remember when my first grandchild was born, and that was one of the concerns that I had, is like, I want to be there for my daughters and my son, my other kids. I want to be there when the babies are born. I want to be there for their birthdays. I want to be there. I want to babysit. And I remember when our oldest grandson, he actually came to live with us for a little while, and he was only like 18 months old. And when he would cry, my son, who was in a wheelchair, would get upset. He did not like conflict. He didn't like anger. It was an emotional thing for him that caused him anxiety. So I would have an 18-month-old crying, and then I would have a 20-something-year-old that was he was nonverbal, so he'd be going and he's upset, and so it's like, I don't know who to take care of. But you want to follow that season that everyone else does, where you're a maiden, and then you're a mother, and then you follow that trajectory, and you want to be a grandmother, and and then all of a sudden something stops you from, it's like, wait, you're 20 something. You said, how old was he when he was injured?
He was 21.
Yeah, 21. So in the Navy, has children, he's independent, just like the trajectory is supposed to be for children as we're parent. You're not supposed to be parenting at 60, like you were saying, 60 years old. You're not supposed to be still parenting. You want to be a grandparent,
And it was like a bomb that got dropped in our family. I was obviously, as his mother, very deeply affected. His wife at the time, during his coma, immediately went out and got herself a conservatorship, a guardianship over him in the state of California. And that's really a jail without bars. So she immediately had the right to make all the decisions for her husband. And she was also very young, I think 20 at the time. And she locked me out. I had no ability to make decisions. Very rarely did she involve me. It was kind of a hostile takeover. She had my son. I'd never even met her when he married her. And next thing I know, I'm basically feeling like my kid is kidnapped. And then in the same situation, even when he lived with his father and his father's third wife, they exploited James for media attention, for his money. It was also the same thing. I had very little ability to access him, and it was living hell. And it affected my oldest daughters, my two daughters, and my youngest son. They all kind of spun out of control and had some very difficult years, especially mentally and emotionally. It was like a bomb, a nuclear bomb got dropped in our family. And I've had to bring all of that back together and bring peace to our lives, as we do as mothers. And again, I have grown grandchildren. I have a new great granddaughter. I have family I wanted to help. I wanted to take care of. I have a daughter who's expecting a baby. I have other responsibilities, and I have to nurture and take care of this family as a unit. And for me to be stuck here, and I don't say that resentfully, because I absolutely adore taking care of my son, but for me to not have any help, which, I mean, there's food prep, there's shopping, there's bills to be paid, there's housekeeping, there's yard work, there's repairs, there's interfacing with the VA. And sometimes that takes hours and hours a day. There's interfacing with the nonprofit organizations. There's setting up his therapies. There's all kinds of work that needs to be done on James's behalf. And then I have to live my life too. There aren't enough
Right.
hours in it. And if I don't have another person here to assist me, James's shower alone takes 3 hours.
Yeah. There's the 3 hours that the system is now offering you is we will come in and shower him, not every day, because 15 hours a week isn't every day. So a few days a week we'll come in and help, and that's the extent. Do you have to take him with you when you go shopping and when you do these things because there's no one to care for him at home? Or how are you doing that?
I elicit the help of my oldest daughter, who doesn't live very far away, and my youngest son, who is temporarily staying with me.
Okay.
They have full-time jobs of their own. They were participating in caregiving on and off over the years, but their lives have got to go on. They can't just, they can't stop their lives like I have.
Yeah.
I can't work anymore. I had to have
Yeah.
a hard stop to my career. I had a forced retirement. The main thing is that James needs care around the clock. Almost
Yeah.
always, about twice a night. He has to be moved. As you know, you
Yeah.
can't let a body that doesn't move lay in a certain position too long because it breaks down the skin. He can't move himself, and he may need to cough, or if he vomits, if he's laying down, because he can only lay on his back or press to the side, either way, he could aspirate. So if someone isn't there and immediately comes in his room and helps him, he could aspirate, which would result
Yeah.
in his passing away. And then
Yeah.
there's, of course, he needs to have his head, he has an adjustable base bed. His head needs to be lifted or lowered. His feet needs to be lifted or lowered. He has circulation issues, temperature issues. If his covers come down and he's cold, he has to be recovered. He may need to urinate in the night. There's all kinds of reasons why he needs care around the clock.
Right. I want to try and show you found out later that he actually was kind of being abused by your ex-husband, that he wasn't getting the care that he needed. And like you say, they were almost using him for the benefits, for the notoriety, for the pats on the back. Oh, aren't you a great dad? Look what you're doing. But let me just show you a quick video. Probably won't be able to show the whole thing because I'm only allowed so many swear words.
Just a little bit further, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
Nothing in James Carey's life is easy. Not standing up, not getting in his wheelchair.
This is that.
Even eating lunch requires his mom to feed him.
What do you think? Is it okay?
15 years ago, Carey, a Marine veteran, suffered a brain injury after he nearly drowned during a training exercise at Camp Pendleton. The injury left him blind, unable to use his body, and with dementia. His mom says he needs care 24/7. And for years, the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs provided a home care worker for him around the clock.
It was perfect. It was perfect. Most of the time, it takes two people. And if I don't get someone else to help me, I'm doing that, all of it, around the clock.
But then, Carey says, with no warning, the VA cut her son's home care hours in January from 168 a week to 16.
What do you think of that?
I think that is pretty hurtful and stuff, because it honestly, they're directly affecting the caregivers I rely on so much.
The VA told us a review done on Carey's records revealed a clerical error. The 24/7 care he was getting was a mistake, they said. Carey's appealed the decision. The Dallas VA director denied it. The VA says if Carey needs more hours of care, he could go to a VA medical foster home or a VA nursing home.
That's such an insult to me. I promised my son I would take care of him for the rest of his life. And I'm not going to put him in a home. Not going to.
The VA told us Carey's situation is unique and that it is not a part of any bigger plan to reduce expenses.
The VA has been a punching bag among veterans, Congress, and the media for decades.
New VA Secretary Doug Collins said in a video last month that with the help of Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, they're making the VA more efficient, which he says will lead to better service for veterans. Part of that plan includes cutting 83,000 VA jobs, which is more than 15% of the agency's staffing.
The federal government does not exist to employ people. It exists to serve people. At the VA, we are focused on serving veterans better than ever before.
Everything I've heard so far is extremely troubling.
Brandon Friedman has been fighting for veterans for nearly 20 years. After his time in the Army, he worked at the VA and then with Vote Vets, a group that advocates for veterans.
While you can say that, those 83,000 cuts aren't coming from doctors and nurses, they're coming from other people. Well, The doctors and nurses need those people to do their jobs and to do their jobs efficiently.
Friedman says the VA is asking veterans to trust that these changes will be for the better. But stories like Carey's, he says, erode confidence in how the VA operates.
This guy sacrificed the better part of his life for this country, and you're going to quibble over some paltry dollar amounts or hours that he's being taken care of. Like, just take care of the guy.
If the VA doesn't change this, how are you going to make it work?
I'm on a fast track to burnout. I don't know. This is our loved one, and we have to accept the fact that he is in this condition in the first place. Why do we have to keep paying that price every day? Why do we have to beg the VA to give him the benefits he earned?
We reached out to Congressman Pat Fallon to ask him about Carey's situation. He told us American veterans and their families should not have to be subject to bureaucratic incompetence and arbitrarily enforced rulings. We need accountability from the VA, particularly when it comes to fulfilling its obligation to serve disabled veterans. Congressman Fallon told me that his office will continue to work with the VA to find a solution for Carey and his family. Doug, they have reached out to the VA, but the VA told them the same thing that they told us, as well as the family.
You know, I think watching everything, you try to put yourself in the place of the family. All of a sudden, the help that you've been so accustomed to is yanked away, but it gets yanked away. And in the meantime, the question becomes, how's the Carey family handling the immediate change for them, obviously, in the home care hours?
Yeah, Doug, Carey's mother told me that the whole family is chipping in. Carey's siblings have taken extended leave from work to come and help. Carey's nephew, who's in high school, will come over to the house and help out when he can. But they've all told me that none of this is doable long term.
A lot of people who've been down that road know that caregiving is one of the hardest things on this planet to do. Brian New and the I-Team, thank you so much.
As he's telling his story, basically what happened is he fell.
When his father had him, and the woman that he was married to, she had a son, and a lot of times they had this idea in their head that they could get James to walk again, which is not how neurological injuries work. It's a neurological injury. It's not a body injury.
Gone forever.
Even though he's never going to walk again. But they wanted to show off like he could walk. So he actually tried to attempt to walk James, is my understanding, into a party. And he was inebriated, and James fell and broke his hip. And he not only broke his hip, but he wasn't taken to a hospital that night. He was expected to sleep that night, and they didn't believe him because everybody at the party was drunk. So he ended up going to the hospital in the morning.
Yeah, and he talks about his pain. He talks about that he, tried to explain to his dad, like, look, at least call me a taxi. I'll take myself to the hospital if I have to. Yeah. And it wasn't finally until like the next day that they called an ambulance and took him and then discovered that, oh, he has a broken hip. These were his caregivers. Kim, people don't understand the abuse in the caregiver programs because there's money involved. And so you will have people that will say, well, you come live with me. I'll be your caregiver because they're getting $3,000 a month. And then they go off and they leave the person alone in the bed and they're not taking care of them. And they have, like you say, open wounds and just horrible abuse that's done for the money. And so then what they'll do is, rather than taking each individual case, they'll do some blanket program that eliminates services because there was abuse by a few, and so that, like you say, what's happening with your son is they're taking this blanket cut, and rather than looking at each individual case, well, this person requires 24/7 care. This person needs someone to check in once in a while just to make sure that everything's okay. So we need to look at each individual case. And what broke my heart the most was when I listened to James talking on that video, and he was so much like my son. And I know that the diagnosis of cerebral palsy is basically brain injury, and it can happen with an accident. It can happen at birth, but at some point there's a lack of oxygen and the brain cells are dead forever. And so it affects people differently. And so James reminded me so much of my son and the care that he requires. And now, because he was a veteran, he was an active duty serviceman at the time of his injury, he does receive veterans benefits, which means, what does that mean? He gets his medical care is at a VA hospital?
Yes, most of the time. If he has an implanted baclofen pump for spasticity, I'm not sure if your son had that gets refilled twice a year at the VA. We have the opportunity through TRICARE to go outside of the VA and use any private doctors that we want, and that would not incur any extra expense for James. However, we live fairly close to the Dallas VA, and we just wanted to, take advantage of that convenience. It's not actually that convenience. And talk about handicap spots. There's got to be hundreds there, and there's never a one open.
Yeah. The whole parking lot should be handicap spots. Yeah.
The whole parking lot's handicapped. There's not a single space available. I think we're going to change that plan and start going outside of the VA for his backlift pump fill. But he receives all of his medical care without cost. He does receive what's called a special pension. It's reserved for very specific injuries, such as the loss of eyesight, both eyes, incapacity to move or care for oneself at all. And that has a portion of it, which is basically his retirement or his medical retirement. And a portion of it is for the purpose of receiving aid and attendance, which no one can define.
I want everyone to understand that the heralding of the new cuts that are being made in our government, that, this is just something, there's so much waste, there's so much fraud, there's so much this, so much that. It's like, yes, and you're forgetting the person. You're not taking it individual basis. And you're such an example of this beautiful young man that served his country, served in Iraq, which, is a very controversial war in the first place. And then to re-enlist because of, like you say, the recession that was going on in 2008. And how can I protect my family? I mean, to do all of that and then just do a blanket cut is so reprehensible. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. I want to close this off on a little bit of a happy note because there's so many good people out there. It's unfortunate that there is so much fraud in the nonprofit world when there's good people like what you're going to tell us, the story that you're going to tell us, that could use so much support. And so tell us about what program has helped you as a family.
Without a doubt, the two most impressive nonprofits that have helped us are the Wounded Warriors and the Tunnel to Tower Foundation. They're absolutely wonderful people there. They do their best. The Wounded Warriors send James his therapist twice a week. He has a recreational therapist and a music therapist. And as you know, music is a wonderful therapy for anyone with a brain injury. Yeah. He also receives, I can't even tell you all the things Tunnel to Towers has done. They're like a family. He should have been receiving physical therapy. He was receiving physical therapy through the VA until about 4 years ago, and they decided to blanket cut his physical therapy off without explanation. Similar situation they're doing now. Without physical therapy with a brain injury of any kind, the muscles atrophy, the spasticity gets worse, the pain and there's deterioration. So he still needs physical therapy. He's not able to get it right now. The VA won't provide it. And the Wounded Warrior did provide it for a while, but they haven't been able to find anybody to come in home to do that. They're also looking for an art therapist. And Tunnel to Towers, of course, built him a mortgage-free adaptive home, which is incredible, because without the ability to get your son through the doorways or, even come in and out the front door, or if there's steps, or if there's, difficulty getting in and out of a shower, if the room isn't large enough for all the major equipment that you need, all of those things have been provided. It's unfortunate that the VA, after taking all of our tax dollars, doesn't provide everything I just described. Yeah. Instead, not only pay your taxes and have all this major amount of money going to that complex, but then you have to turn around and donate more money to nonprofits in order to assure that the veterans are actually getting the things they need. And if you had heard James give his own input into the CBS news report that we just recently did, he stated this so perfectly, and he is rather cognitive and has moments where he's profound. But he said, this is his oath of office. He kept his word. He served his country. He was guaranteed these benefits and these services should he ever become hurt in the line of duty. And when he did, he feels like his country has betrayed him. The VA system has betrayed him because they have the nerve to break their contract. Yeah. He deserves to be cared for, according to them, with exceptional care. Those are their words, in the safest environment. And the safest environment for my son, and the VA knows this because they keep statistics on this, they know that the biological mothers are the safest place for these men and women.
That's right.
To be housed in their own homes with their own families with love and attention. My son has never fallen. He has never broken any bones, and he has never been neglected, nor has his skin ever broken in my care under my watch in all these years. And it never will. And I will never put him in a home, and he will never leave my side as long as I live. The problem is they extract this care from us without any compensation. They want me to justify why I have to walk out the door in order to get more hours. They want me to, just for an extra 12 a week. They have now come up with a new program where they want me to say, well, what are you doing when you leave the house?
That's the thing. It's like the increased paperwork. Oh, the caregiver program tried to come at me with a new way of getting a few extra hours, maybe up to 12, by asking you to make a list of what you do when you leave the house, that they wanted a record. Then I do this and it takes me this long. Then I do this and it takes me this long, so that they can justify. How about you come over and just watch him for a couple hours? There you go. That's all you need to do. Once you spend a day in the life of these families, then you'll know exactly what it takes, instead of all your, crazy paperwork. That's unbelievable.
I mean, we already made all the sacrifices. They already know they can count on us. How do they have the audacity to gaslight us and put more responsibility, and for us to justify, as the families who care about these veterans more than anyone possibly could? It's circular. It's word salad. It is deflection.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you're right. I mean, that was one of the things I was so proud of with my son, was he never had skin breakdown. He never had any injuries. And they would say, oh, you're taking really good care of him. I'm like, I know I am. Like you, I would never put him in the hands. When he was in elementary school and in high school, the Kiwanis Club, fabulous organization, had a program where they have a camp every summer. And they kept trying me to get me to send him to camp. And, like James, he was nonverbal and he was blind. And so I said, I can't send him there. He has no way of telling me what happened, or protecting himself, or saying no to someone, or screaming out loud. Or how do I protect him from someone that might be abusing him at this camp? And so it took a lot of work, but finally they convinced me, no, it's a good program. And we ended up sending him. And the beautiful people, these all students at Portland State University that would volunteer to work at Kiwanis. And he loved it, and they loved him, and they formed relationships. But yeah, to just take your son to an institution and leave him there, which is what the government is trying to get people to do with children that have disabilities. Just put them in an institution, we'll personalize all the care, and then we don't have to give you money anymore. And it turns in, it's frightening. It's so sad and like you say, thank heavens you were able to retire, because if you were a younger mom and had an income that you relied on for livability, that you have to give up to care for a child, an adult child, you can't have it both ways. You can't be a full-time caregiver and have a full-time job. No. It's not possible. And, statistically, the amount of caregivers that actually die earlier than the people that they're caring for, I can't remember what the statistics were, but it's huge, because you don't have the time to care for yourself, and back injuries, or you fall. One of my friends actually fell. She was a physical therapist, causing her to be in a wheelchair. So now she's in a wheelchair taking care of her daughter who's in a wheelchair. So lifting, like you say, a 6'3", 200-pound man is putting yourself, if you get injured, then what?
If I don't preserve myself and care for myself and have time for myself, for my mental, emotional, and physical well-being, then I will become useless to my son. And then what? I asked the VA, what is your plan for James? Should I walk out the door to water the lawn and have a heart attack and die on the front lawn while he's in the house?
Yeah.
And crickets. They don't have a plan, and yet they own him. And that is a significant difference between, say, for instance, your situation and mine. They did this to him. It's their responsibility to care for him. They're fortunate that they have people like me. But frankly, when you sign up for that military, they own you. You become the property of the military. That's why I couldn't sue anybody when he was neglected and drowned. That happened out of neglect. It was an accident because someone wasn't doing their job. Had he been hurt in the civilian world, we could have sued and probably won hundreds of millions of dollars for these kinds of injuries.
Right.
But the military did this to him, and it's their responsibility to give him the quality care. But they take advantage of people like me without giving us any kind of living wage or anything other than a silly stipend, which, by the way, is a fraction of what I used to make when I was in business.
Yeah.
They're upset about it too. There are good people everywhere. There's a really wonderful woman who's been helping me at the VA so that we can approach a second appeal. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but we are making a second appeal.
I'm so glad that you're doing that. And it's so sad that, like you say, now we're, almost 6 months into the year. This will go on for years. This will go on for at least at least the entire rest of the year. And then who knows what will happen. And I love that you pointed out the fact that accidents happen. I mean, my husband owned a heavy equipment company, and they could have been down the block, but if their sign was anywhere near an accident site, they would be included in a lawsuit. And that's just kind of how our litigious community works in the United States of America. But the fact that the military has this way of getting around that through their commitment to take care of you, no matter what, it just breaks my heart. And like you say, there are really good people. I know, like you said, that 2-star general that you're working with that's helping you out and trying to make changes. That's just the saddest thing ever. All we can do is vote, you people. You got to, that's the only power that you have is to go through the system.
Our congressman, Pat Fallon, here in this district, his office has been very helpful. And of course, James is entitled to vote. He has voting rights, and he did vote, and neither he nor I voted for this administration. That is for certain. But we know that these cuts started last summer, and the VA has had a reputation for being troubled and difficult, frankly, impossible for so long that these changes have to be made. And I value my privacy, but I would rather speak out and bring attention to the fact that our veterans are not being cared for the way that Americans assume they are being cared for. They're not. It's a difficult situation. They have an outrageous amount of veterans killing themselves daily. After experiencing the VA the way I have, the despondency, sometimes I'm left in a puddle of tears at the end of the day, the discouragement, the outright injustice, the way they treat us is certainly not like we matter. I have to justify why I'm calling on his behalf all the time, like I'm some kind of criminal.
Yes.
We get treated like garbage. And my son, even though it's thank you for your service, well, come on over and feed him a sandwich because, he really needs help. It's hard to keep going, though, that we don't have the support from the people that were supposed to give it to us.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you pointed that out, that when you are a caregiver, you call on behalf of the person with the disability. You have to provide them legal proof that you have been made power of attorney or that you legally have the right. So even when my son as soon as he turned 18, I lost all my power. And so then we had to pay money to a lawyer to get the power of attorney. And then when I would call to refill a prescription or answer a question or try to get a feedback from some kind of medical thing, that I had to prove, that say, could I speak to Tony Steelman? I'd say, well, I'm his mother. Well, can you put him on the phone? I'd say, he's nonverbal. They'd say, well, can you prove that you are his caregiver legally? And so then I would have to fax them a copy of the power of attorney for them to, and I have another friend in Oregon that's going through the same thing. Once her daughter turned 18, she's no longer able to get and help out with her medical stuff. She can't do it on her own. There's that common sense. Like, look, there's the letter of the law and then there's reality. And there needs to be some kind of adaptation for the reality of caregivers who are working with people that are either comatose or nonverbal or not able to completely make coherent decisions in their life. And there needs to be some kind of system that let's just use our common sense. Want me to send you a picture of him? So, I'm glad you pointed that.
I love it when they try to talk to him. I'm saying, okay, you can talk to him. Let me know if you can understand anything he says.
Yeah.
And then they feel stupid. As you know, as a mother, every time I have to regurgitate, every time I have to go back, every time I have to suffer the blackness of the grief that I live with, the nightmare that it is to have lost my son's life. For all intents and purposes, he will never have a life. And to have to tell that over and over and over again, it's like opening a wound. As you know, as mothers, we don't experience our children's pain outside of ourselves. We experience it as if it is our pain.
Yeah, you're so right. Well, thank you so much, Kim, for sharing your story. I think it's such an important message that needs to get out there just for the world to understand. And, before you make a decision, I think the message that Kim and I are giving out to you is before you make a decision, go volunteer, go work with a family, experience what it's like before you make a blanket decision on how someone's care should be distributed, how funds should be distributed. And unless you live it in so many different areas, you don't understand it. And when you talk about the daily grief, you're grieving your son's life, you're grieving your life, you're grieving the loss that your other children, they lost their mother too. My child was the last of 6. And so he has 5 siblings that lost their mother in a lot of ways. And because his care took priority out of what I should have been doing for them. And, fortunately, they're good, wonderful people that understand that. And they also helped in his care. And what a blessing it was for me to have 5 other people that could help out with his care. And you have your 2 other children that, are right there with you. So it's a family affair. Everyone is suffering, not just this person with the injury. It affects everyone in the family's life. And that's the message that I think is so important to get out.
And for mothers to understand that when your children are considering going into the military, that they know what they're getting into. And I'm not saying, mothers, don't let your babies grow up to be Marines.
Yeah.
But you need to understand that the VA is playing a game where, you're going to get this and you're going to get that. And then when you get home, it's like, we made a mistake. That's not really what we're going to give you after all. And that's the way it feels. So to consider the changes that need to be made so that we can guarantee that these veterans get what they earned.
That's a great point. And I love that because, they're talking about veterans benefits, but they're also talking about the difficulty that America is having in recruiting people to sign up for military duty. It's like, well, maybe if the VA aftercare was just absolutely stellar, then getting people to sign up to risk their lives might be a little bit easier. But when they're seeing what's happening to the people that are coming back from military service and their lives are completely ruined, it's like, well, then why would I sign up for that? So that's a really good point, Kim.
It is. That's what we as Americans need to change. And we can do that as women. We can do that as mothers because the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world.
Yes, I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. You're amazing. Love you. I love this. And, well, thank you so much. You're just a beautiful person. And I love your son. I love your daughter that's helping out with you. That it just breaks my heart. It just, when I saw that thing of your son on TikTok, it just a lot of emotions flooded back. So I know that caregiving is, and even when you're relieved from some caregiving, like in my case, our son passed away in 2022, but I was in, I was in my late 60s, and I feel like I'm trying to catch up 38 years of my life. And that's not really easy to do. The sad thing is, like you, Kim, what we're benefiting from caring for him overrides maybe something as like a career or education that I could have gotten. The love and the thing that caring for someone brings in, you can't even describe. So I'm not ungrateful for having to care for him, but it's also exhausting, and you also are giving up a lot. So I'm so glad you shared your story with me today.
And you've been super inspirational to me. I mean, ever since I started watching on TikTok, I was like, we're ex-Mormons and we have these sons that we care for. And, you're into fitness. I've tried to keep my body strong and healthy all these years, and all the things that we have in common. I was like, you just inspired me so much.
We are sister souls for sure. Yep. Love it. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon. And I have a daughter in Texas, so there's a good opportunity we can meet up at some point.
That would be awesome, wouldn't it?
That would be so great. Thanks so much. Okay. Bye-bye. I hope Kim's and James's story has inspired you to maybe think differently, to maybe get involved in Wounded Warriors program or the Towers program that she talked about. If you have expendable income that you don't know what to do with and you want to give to a nonprofit charitable organization, please look into that. Please volunteer where you can. The people that have been in my life and Kim's life that have given us a little bit of a break, a little bit of respite, there are no words to thank those people that do that. So if that's something, if nothing else, if this show inspires you to make a contribution to one of these charitable organizations versus something that maybe needs to be a little bit more looked into, then it's done everything it has. Or if it's inspired you to call someone, or maybe even just take over a plate of brownies to James and Kim at one point, just anything to get outside yourself and to serve in the community, but to serve where it really makes a difference. So thanks for joining me today on She Became Visible. And also please follow Kim on TikTok. Thanks for joining me on She Became Visible today. And we will be together again next week. Hey, don't forget to subscribe. You have to subscribe, like, and share. That's how we get the word out. Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
She became visible.